on then.
You want me to hate you?
I want you to try.
Ow! What are you...
Try again.
Why are you doing that?
Too slow. Try again.
Cut it out!
Weak. Again. Again.
Stop it!
Again! Your anger. You can get lost in it. The path ahead is difficult. And you, Atreus, are clearly not ready.
I've been a fan of Santa Monica Studios' God of War series since the first entry came out on PS2 back in 2005. My first exposure to the original God of War outside of magazine ads was a demo disc that covered a good deal leading up to the Hydra King boss in the game's opening section. I played that demo honestly more times than I can count and came to the conclusion that I needed this game. Everything about it sang in a way I hadn't really experienced up to that point. I could go on, but best to save further elaboration for when I replay those games. The long and short of it though, I fucking love God of War. It had long been one of my favorite series, but that didn't stop me from getting burned out on it. By the time God of War Ascension rolled around in 2013, the series was starting to spin its wheels a bit. We were now 6 mainline entries in and getting yet another prequel. The formula was growing tired, the blood-soaked sheen having worn off, and I was ready to hang up my blades and move on to other games. Then, as E3 2016 came around, rumors spun pointing towards a return for the Ghost of Sparta in the form of a soft reboot that would see him venture over to the Norse pantheon. Being a huge fan of Norse myth, when the rumors proved true, I lost my shit. It helped that the official reveal absolutely slapped the E3 crowd, the live orchestra, Kratos slowly stepping from the shadows, and then the game came out, and I was a little disappointed. I had a lot of gripes with God of War 2018 after my first playthrough back at launch, but there's always been this lingering feeling that I was too harsh or that my expectations were out of whack. Whatever it was, it resulted in my coming off the game rather lukewarm, but still excited for what was to come, certain that whatever issues I had could be fixed in the inevitable sequel. And in 2022, a sequel did come in the form of God of War Ragnarok, but this isn't about that. Not yet, at least. No, this is about God of War 2018, because in the lead up to my playing Ragnarok, I wanted to go through 2018 again, both as a refresher on the story and characters, and sort of a reappraisal. Nearly 5 years on since I last played it, how, if at all, would my opinion differ? And so, without further ado, it's time to talk God of War 2018.
So he's gonna live?
Yes.
Then we are leaving.
Wait. Not without thanks. You want solitude? This mark will hide you from those who might make your journey difficult.
Let's kick things off with the story. While this won't be a comprehensive summary, it will touch on some major spoilers, so if you haven't experienced the game for yourself and would like to, I recommend jumping to the timecode that should be popping up on screen right about now. God of War 2018 has one of my favorite opening sections in any game. I know that's a pretty big statement, but hear me out. From contextual action, some good old walk and talk, traveling by boat, light exploration, puzzle solving, and a good deal of combat, it encapsulates all of the major beats players will experience throughout the rest of the game, while also doing excellent work getting both new players and God of War veterans up to speed on Kratos' new status quo. Following the events of God of War 3, Kratos left Greece and wandered north. We're not told how long it's been exactly, but safe to assume it's in the realm of centuries. In that time, he met a woman named Faye, and together they had a son, Atreus. But in this opening, we find that Faye has passed away, and now it's left to Kratos to raise the boy on his own. The Kratos we meet is subdued, a far cry from his previous incarnation whose primary mode of communication was guttural roar. He's also demanding of his son, not unkind, but clearly unused to being a father. It's evident from their first conversation that Faye did the heavy lifting when it came to raising Atreus, and we watch as he struggles with something as small as placing a hand on his son's shoulder. All of this is solid stuff, but what cinches the opening for me is how it ends. They return to their cabin, gather Faye's ashes, and in accordance with her last wish, plan to spread them from the tallest peak in all the realms when a mysterious figure comes quite literally knocking on their door. This man, who we later learn is the god Baldur, is looking for something and he's certain he's found it in Kratos. What follows is a knockdown, drag-out cinematic brawl that sees Kratos tap into that Spartan fury he spent so long honing as he goes toe-to-toe with a god who cannot die. It's phenomenal, especially in how it simultaneously captures what previous God of War games did with their own openings, while forefronting the intimacy inherent to this new incarnation of Kratos. While the Colossus of Rhodes in God of War 2 and the fight with Poseidon Top Guy's back in God of War 3 put scale front and center, we knew Kratos could come out of those encounters relatively unscathed. Yet here we watch him face off against an unassuming tattooed man who's spouting things neither we nor Kratos understands, and what should be an easy win turns into a fight that nearly robs Kratos of his life. Kratos does manage to best Baldur, but the encounter leaves him worried. People are after them, and he doesn't know why. So they start off on their journey to the peak earlier than planned, their hands forced by machinations outside of their control. And thus begins God of War 2018 with a hell of a first impression. Admittedly, that's also kind of the extent of things as far as the plot goes. Their ultimate goal never changes, rather wrinkles are added as new obstacles crop up along the way. They encounter and befriend a witch of the woods, who they later learn is the goddess Freya, aka Baldur's mother, who aids them on several occasions, from guiding them to Alfheim to healing Atreus when he falls ill. They meet the Midgard serpent, Jormungandr, introducing some time shenanigans, as it's heavily implied he is from the future, knocked backwards in time during his climactic fight with Thor at Ragnarok. And in classic God of War fashion, they end up traveling into the serpent's stomach for a spot of gastrointestinal spelunking. They also run into Mimir, a fast-talking know-it-all in the literal sense, not the annoying sense, and kindly cut off his head so that he may accompany them on their way to Jotunheim after it's discovered that the true tallest peak in all the realms is there, not Midgard. As you can see, things definitely happen, but it's all in service of their goal to get to the mountain. This isn't a bad thing. As far as story hooks go, it's a solid foundation, but there is a sort of stop and start nature to the proceedings that can prove irksome at times. Kratos and Atreus will think they're finally going to reach the peak, only to be stopped by one thing or another, leading to an emotional seesaw as you ready yourself for what ends up being yet another false climax. That doesn't really impact the experience all that much though, because if you couldn't tell by my breezing through major events, this isn't a plot-focused game. Rather, the folks over at Santa Monica Studio chose to concentrate their efforts on building out emotional arcs for Kratos and Atreus, and goddamn do they nail it. Near the end of the game, as Kratos and Atreus' climactic clash with Baldur draws to a close, Freya calls Kratos an animal who knows nothing but cruelty and rage, and just looking at his actions in the previous God of War games, it's hard to disagree with her. Prior to God of War 2018, Kratos was characterized as vengeance incarnate. If he is wrong, the only recourse was to crawl his way out of the depths of Hades and return the favor 100-fold. But while this holds true of the older incarnation of Kratos, it actively ignores everything that both she and players have witnessed up to this point. Here, players find a man who has been tempered by time. That ever-present rage is most assuredly still present, bubbling away beneath the surface, but Kratos now understands that rage uncontrolled and undirected can only lead to ruin. He watched the world reduced to a crumbling mess, an entire society ruptured and besieged by uncontrolled natural calamities due to his actions. He has had to come to terms with that, and what we see here is the result. A man who wants nothing more than to ensure he will never be in a position to do such harm again. That was easy to do when he was on his own. Turns out self-imposed isolation is an excellent deterrent, but this becomes much more difficult when he has a family. While he was able to maintain a level of detachment when Faye was still alive, placing the heavy lifting of childbearing on her shoulders, her passing forces him to pick up where she left off, and he is less than stellar at the job. He is demanding, more general than father, but he is also fearful and in mourning. He loved Faye, and though he rarely lets it show, her passing has left him aching and broken, and he's trying to keep himself together in order to teach Atreus to raise him into something better than what Kratos was and is. He sees his own rage in Atreus and often struggles to curb it in a way that's constructive, coming off blunt and harsh in his teachings. It doesn't help matters that Atreus is so unlike his father. Where Kratos is a brick wall, both in stature and how he displays emotion, Atreus is somewhat frail, much more easy to read. He is inquisitive and eager, readily being dressed down by his father because he wants to learn and better himself. But he also pushes back against Kratos, calling him out when his father makes particularly egregious mistakes and pushing him out of his stoic comfort zone, whether that's through helping others or learning how to read runes. This works in a gameplay sense by justifying the existence of side quests and tangents along their journey, but it also serves their character development by giving the two some room to breathe, to have conversations that serve no narrative purpose, but help flesh out their dynamic. It's only through caving to Atreus' desires to help those they encounter or wandering around the world in search of hidden chests and secrets that players get to see firsthand just how terrible Kratos is at telling stories, or get more insight into how the two of them are dealing with their grief. One of my favorite side quests sees the duo hunting down an old witch's bones because a ghost told them that doing so would allow them to speak with the dead. Kratos isn't interested. He doesn't believe the ghost for a second, but Atreus can't help himself from hoping that this might be an opportunity to speak with his mother again. When he tells his father this, Kratos asks him what he would say to her if given the chance. Atreus tells him that he just wants to tell her about all the things they've seen and done since leaving home, and to tell her that they're doing okay.
What would you say to Mom?
Nothing.
Nothing?
There is nothing left to say.
What about everything we've done so far? That man coming to the house? Talking to the world serpent? We've done so many amazing things. I just want to tell her about them. Don't you?
What else would you say to her?
I tell her that we're both okay. Not to worry about us.
Atreus, I miss her too. You know this.
I thought I knew very little.
The only significant stumbling block with regards to their characterization comes about 2/3 of the way through the game. Up to this point, Kratos has been hiding the fact that the two of them are gods. Kratos has no love lost for the gods, regardless of pantheon, and he feared that should Atreus be made aware of their godhood, he might come to resemble those very gods that Kratos despises. However, upon finally telling Atreus the truth, the boy responds by simply asking if this means he'll be able to turn into animals. There's an innocence to his question that reinforces Atreus' character arc thus far. He is, above all else, still a child, and this moment underlines that fact while also serving to ease Kratos' fears. However, things take an abrupt turn as godhood quickly goes to Atreus' head. He begins to think himself better than mortals, better than other gods, and takes to mistreating his friend, disrespecting his mother's memory, and even killing a defenseless foe. Meanwhile, Kratos doesn't really respond to any of these turns in any meaningful way. While he's been critical of Atreus' missteps throughout the game, he's oddly quiet during this portion of their journey, only seriously calling out Atreus' behavior when a botched encounter with Baldur lands the two of them in Helheim. It all feels rushed and incongruous with what I've seen thus far, and sticks out as the lone blemish on what are otherwise superbly placed, nuanced character arcs. The reason why this slight dip stands out so much despite only lasting for a fraction of the total runtime is because the relationship between Kratos and Atreus kind of is the narrative. Their growth from relative strangers who happen to be related to one another to a nigh unstoppable team capable of taking down a once thought invincible god is what makes this story work, despite not having much in the way of tangible plot. The biggest of props go out to Christopher Judge and Sonny Soljic too, who had the unenviable task of stepping into Kratos and Atreus' shoes. You can tell they put their all into these roles and the game wouldn't be half of what it is without them. And while I focus primarily on Kratos and Atreus, the impact of the whole cast and their respective actors cannot be understated. Many of the characters present have fairly defined roles in popular media, drawing from the fragments of mythology that we have access to. Rather than leaning into these, the writers chose to carve out their own interpretations, and the game is all the better for it. Taking someone like Baldur, a more or less cliched god of gods, the best of the Aesir, so loved that every being in every realm agreed to never do him harm, and reinterpreting that as an inability to feel any sensation, positive or negative, before asking what that would do to someone's mental state is fucking neat. And Jeremy Davies' unhinged performance turns him from someone who could have been grating into the right bastard that I adored watching chew up the screen. I could speak at length about almost everyone, but a special mention has to be made to Mimir. I could listen to this lovely little horn fellow spinning yarns detailing his close calls with Bifrost nipples all day. Alistair Neil Duncan's sultry Scottish tones are a treasure and a delight, and I hope he's around for many a God of War yet to come. Briefly circling back to the narrative, while the main story is relatively straightforward, the lore and backstory peppered throughout serve to complicate the world and provide tantalizing hints at what may come in future installments. Tales of Tyr's travels to China, Egypt, Mesoamerica, and more, a giant's prophecy foretelling the arrival of Loki and the fall of the Ghost of Sparta, the fact that Atreus himself is the Loki present in the prophecy, there's a reason why, despite my initial reservations about the game, I was still excited for the future of God of War. It's all thanks to these hints and lore morsels that sent me into a tailspin of speculation and theory crafting that still hasn't led up to this day. To close out this section, while the game may be light on plot, what is there serves its role in providing a platform for the characters. There's a depth and subtlety to their development that left me smiling with every minuscule step Kratos and Atreus took towards better understanding one another. Barring one odd segment that feels out of step with the characterization up to that point, the story is wholly worth experiencing just to get a chance to spend some time with these characters and witness the truly outstanding writing and performances that went into bringing them to life. Before I jump into what it's like to actually play God of War 2018, a quick aesthetically inclined detour down to music and graphics. I can't deny the game looks great. Even as games have continued to advance in the years since its release, it still stands tall among them, even if it's no longer fighting for the throne amongst the best of the best. That said, the characters follow a trend in modern big budget games that I'm not particularly fond of, going for a more generalized photorealistic look without having any specific art style. I'd rather a game commit to a distinctive look all its own. As is, this model of Kratos could probably be modded into Insomniac Spider-Man without feeling too out of place. I do enjoy the character designs themselves, however. Kratos has always been built, but there was a litheness to his previous design that felt like a Greek statue given life. Now he's wider, thicker, and a movable wall, lending him a sense of weight and quiet intensity. This extends to the other characters as well, with Baldur once again being a standout. The tattoos, the hair, the swagger, it all comes together to make someone who is at once the polar opposite of Kratos from a design standpoint, but who manages to never be overshadowed by the Spartan. But the real standout for me are the environments. The bulk of the journey takes place in Midgard and consists of wonderfully rendered cold northern landscapes, even if I could stand for a few more forested areas to break up the many rocky beaches and caves. The highlights though have to be Alfheim and the Witch's Sanctuary. Much of the game's color choice is muted, which fits the abandoned pre-apocalyptic tone, but the monotony did start to wear on me as the game went on. However, in Alfheim and Witch's Sanctuary, the artist cut loose on the colors. The golds and odd architecture of Alfheim and the vibrancy of the reds and yellows in Witch's Sanctuary give these locales a sense of life that is missing elsewhere in the game. They break up the muted greens and grays and browns and have me longing for just a few more locales in this vein. As for the music, I didn't find it particularly noteworthy. It's not bad by any means. Bear McCreary is a competent composer, but most of it is just wholly unmemorable, songs that could easily be slotted into any number of fantasy franchises. There was the occasional track I enjoyed, especially Deliverance with its frantic strings, but the most telling thing for me is that when I went back to listen to the soundtrack after completing the game, I remembered next to none of it other than those songs that popped up multiple times during major story beats. And even then, recognition was due more to their persistence than because I enjoyed them. It's a shame, as earlier God of War games really carved out a distinct musical identity for themselves, something that this iteration is sadly lacking. While everything thus far has been a pretty drastic shift from earlier God of War games, the changes become that much more pronounced when looking at how God of War 2018 plays. Previous games used fixed camera angles and numerous set combos using square for light attacks and triangle for heavy attacks reminiscent of other character action games, but with a bloody cinematic flair all its own in the form of contextual finishers. It was never quite as mechanically deep as the best examples of the genre, but it was always a joy watching Kratos' blades cut a bloody arc across the screen. Things were bound to change when it was revealed that 2018 would be ditching the fixed camera angles for a fully controllable over-the-shoulder perspective. The numerous combos have also been pared down drastically, with more focus given to when moves are executed in regards to one another, such as using a light attack while sprinting or dodging. Light and heavy attacks also now default to R1 and R2 respectively, though there is an option to change this back to square and triangle like in the older games. Kratos also leaves his iconic Blades of Chaos behind for most of the journey, opting instead for the Leviathan axe. With the blades focused on mid to long range combat, the axe is built for close range, though it can be thrown out and recalled at any time to dole out some distance damage. On top of this, there's also light and heavy runic attacks acting as special moves running on a cooldown, as well as Kratos' Spartan Rage. When activated, Kratos enters a time state of invulnerability, leaping towards enemies and dishing out brutal hand-to-hand blows. Lastly, there's Atreus. This is a two-person journey after all, and Atreus can prove crucial as he unleashes a volley of arrows with the press of the square button. And later in the game, Atreus gains access to runic summons by holding square, allowing him to bring forth a spectral murder of crows, packs of wolves, etc. for some additional benefits. This sounds like a lot, there's really no need to worry. The game does an excellent job easing you into the feel of things. Both Kratos and Atreus' move pools start out fairly limited and can be upgraded at your own pace as you earn experience. Meanwhile, abilities like runic attacks and summons are unlocked gradually over the course of the adventure, with plenty of time between unlocks to get some practice in before the next mechanic is introduced. It helps that I found the game to be fairly easy, even on the normal difficulty, barring some optional boss fights. This could be seen as a mark against it, as I never felt the need to try out some of my fancy new moves, but that never hampered my enjoyment. Quite the opposite actually, as it meant I could take in the world and characters without worrying too much about a sudden difficulty spike interrupting the pacing. Plus, higher difficulties are always there for those seeking a bit more of a challenge. The one exception came from the aforementioned optional bosses. While they're not required to finish the game, there is an implied sense of narrative importance that made me feel inclined to complete them. In general, the combat is deliberate, with each swing of Kratos' axe packing the entire weight of the God of War behind it, and most standard enemies and bosses are built around this. These encounters, however, pit Kratos against foes that can leap from one side of the arena to the other almost instantly, only to then immediately grind Kratos' face into the dirt. Movements like these also tend to break lock-on, often resulting in my frantically trying to refocus on them with only a fraction of a second with which to dodge or parry their incoming attacks. Aspects like this made what were otherwise satisfying encounters that pushed me to use all the tools at my disposal feel a bit overly punishing, and was the only time I chose to lower the difficulty so I could just get the story and move on. Another means of making things easier is upgrading Kratos' gear. God of War 2018 takes a hard swerve into action RPG territory, granting the Ghost of Sparta a number of stats: strength, runic, defense, vitality, luck, and cooldown. This means that in addition to using experience to unlock new moves and upgrade runic attacks, you can also buy and equip armor to increase these stats. The There are 3 main armor types that correspond to Kratos' chest, wrist, and waist, in addition to pommels for his axe and armor for Atreus as well. I found it best to adorn Kratos in a complete armor set, for example the Pauldron of the Ancients, Gauntlet of the Ancients, and Belt of the Ancients. Doing so frequently grants unique buffs, while also keeping Kratos' wardrobe aesthetically coherent. Armor can also be upgraded using money in the form of Hacksilver and items found in the world. Some armor also has enchantment slots. When equipped, enchantments confer additional stat buffs and bonuses ranging from +5 to strength to granting a protective barrier on a successful parry. Again, if this sounds like a lot, well, this time it kind of is. This is arguably the messiest aspect of God of War 2018. While armor can be upgraded, I didn't feel much incentive until near the end of the game. New armor comes around regularly enough that upgrading what I had on hand felt pointless, since I'd just be ditching it soon anyway. Then there are the enchantments, which they overload you with, even as a majority of them become dead weight once you start finding epic and legendary ones. And doing even a fraction of the side content grants enough of these higher tier enchantments that the vast majority will either be sold off or sit there clogging your inventory. It all feels a bit imbalanced and poorly paced, leading to frequent trips to the inventory screen, but because most of what I found wasn't useful, it quickly turned into busy work that distracted from those aspects of the game that I enjoy, namely the story, exploration, and combat. Speaking of exploration, the world structure may be God of War 2018's most pronounced deviation from previous entries. Where those games were linear with a splash of Metroidvania-style abilities and backtracking, this entry opens the world up, giving players much more freedom in choosing where they want to explore. It's not quite open world, more hub and spoke, with a central location in the Lake of Nine and numerous other areas branching off from there. The Lake of Nine itself changes periodically over the course of the game, granting access to new locations to explore. Many of the branches are optional as well, often tied to side quests and providing opportunities to track down loot, take out Odin's ravens, uncover murals telling the history of the Jotnar, etc. The only real issues in terms of exploration came from the enemy variety and the Lake of Nine itself. All told, there are maybe 24 different enemy types in the game, including bosses. The enemies themselves are unique and interesting, requiring an understanding of each's capabilities and movesets, especially when the game starts throwing in different elemental types. They also vary the composition of encounters enough that I couldn't just zone out and button mash my way through. That said, I can only see so many of the same palette swapped enemies before non-essential combat starts to feel like a chore. As for the Lake of Nine, my issue came in towards the middle of the game, after most of the areas are available, but before fast travel is unlocked. Doing my 3rd or 4th loop around the lake to hunt down what few things I'd missed previously dragged the game to a halt. I'm the kind of player that likes to do as much side content as I can before moving on, so this is in part my own doing, but it also could have been remedied if fast travel was unlocked sooner. For a game that actively encourages taking your time to explore and experience everything the world has to offer, not giving the player access to fast travel until deep into the second half of the game felt like an odd choice. Alright, I've dealt out a good deal of criticism here, and while it's not unearned and is absolutely worth discussing, it's also safe to say that I have firmly come around on God of War 2018. I loved living in this world, soaking into little details, witnessing the victories and hardships both large and small that Kratos and Atreus go through along the way. I still have my gripes, for sure, but they all amount to so little in a game this satisfying to play and with characters so easy to fall for. In many ways, God of War 2018 feels like a prologue, setting the world and characters in motion, getting the pieces in place just right so that everything can be thoroughly appended later on, and I, for one, could not be more excited to be there when it does. Taking someone like Baldur, a more or less cliched god of gods, the best of the A series, so loved that every... Yes? Can I help you?